the last podcast, you only have to study one of these revolutions. So if your school has studied the French Revolution, please continue listening. But if your school has studied the American Revolution, please check the previous podcast. Okay, without further ado, let's get started. So, in France, it was organized into 3 regimes. You had the first regime, which was the king and the church. The second regime was the rich people. And the third regime was basically everyone else, all the plebs. And this made up 95% of the people in the country. Now, as you can imagine, this 95% of the people were paying all of the tax. As well as that, they had an awful lot of food shortages. So the living conditions for people were not amazing if you lived in the third estate or the third regime. A lot of French soldiers had also gone over to fight in the American Revolution and had witnessed how a group of people can make a change to a country just by working together. So these soldiers came back and they were speaking about the American Revolution, leading to an awful lot of people wanting change. So this led to the Estates General being brought up. Now, the Estates General was where people came together and they voted on change. The only problem with this is each estate got their own vote. So what that meant was there was always a 3-vote majority with a 2-to-1 ratio, which meant that the one person who was always left out was the entire third estate. So the third estate was not happy with this. So they basically left. They left and they started their own one called the National Assembly, which led to the first parliament being set up in France. This kick-started the revolution. And when we're talking about the revolution, one of the key battles that we should know about is the Bastille Day. So Bastille Day represents the day where the king's power was weakened by the people as they worked together to topple the king's guards and the king's soldiers. And it's remembered and celebrated every year in France on the 14th of July. So as a result of this revolution, people were now seen as equal. Whether you were rich, you were a member of the church, or you were the king. King Louis XVI was still on the throne, but he was weaker. And then this led into what was known as the Reign of Terror. So Maximilien Robespierre is one of our key people, and he created a group known as the Jacobins. Now, they wanted a full republic with no monarch at all in the country. This scared the king and queen, which led to them fleeing the country, but they were caught just at the border. Now, this scared an awful lot of people because a lot of countries within Europe at this time were monarchies. And the monarchies were seeing that if one country would fight back against them, other countries would follow suit. So this meant that France was actually at war with an awful lot of different countries, weakening the army itself. But this reign of terror was very big within France, and it brought about one of the most iconic weapons to ever be used, the guillotine. The guillotine was a large blade that would fall down on top of a person and chop their head off. A fun fact is that it was actually last used in France in 1977, which is not actually all that long ago. It's less than 50 years ago. But this reign of terror did mean that people started to fear Robespierre, which meant that him and his men were feared enough that people killed them. They did, however, get what they wanted, and a new type of government came into power that was more moderate. However, King Louis's son was still placed on the throne, as people did still like the idea of having a monarchy, but the monarchy in France did eventually disappear, and you can still actually go visit the Palace of Versailles where the monarchy lived. Now, the consequences of this revolution was that the monarchy eventually did die off within France. Rulers across Europe were in fear that people would revolt and turn against them and they would end up dead. So this meant that they started to treat the ordinary people better. It also inspired future revolutions such as the Irish Rebellion of 1798, which will be our next chapter that we look at. Okay guys, thanks so much for listening. Nice and easy chapter. I love these. They're just so easy to learn about. And I will see you in the next chapter. Bye!